Imagine a world where the mind is the scene of the crime, and it's inspired by the works of Stanley Kubrick, James Bond, and it captured the best elements of Ocean's 11. In 2010, theater goers were introduced to Inception, writer-director Christopher Nolan's massive critical and box office hit that propelled the Dark Knight director from a talented auteur to one of the most powerful voices working in the film industry today. How does Inception hold up 10 years later? Where does it fit into Nolan's ongoing oeuvre, and perhaps maybe the most hotly debated question related to Inception? Does that top keep spinning or does it fall? I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and this is the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com. In today's special episode, we'll be joined by Alexandra Bohannon, Laron Chapman, and Joe Light to explore our take on the answers to those questions before we lay down our final verdict. Is Inception one of the great timeless blockbusters, or is it one of those that's better left to the past? All of that and more coming up next. Hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Cinematic Schematic. Today we'll be taking a look at one of Christopher Nolan's most famous original films, Inception, on its 10th anniversary. We'll discuss our experiences with the film leading up to its July 16th, 2010 release, and our reaction to this rewatch before we go even deeper by taking a look at some of the more memorable and pressing ideas in the film. All of this will be leading up to the answer to the big question: does the film still hold up 10 years later? We couldn't look back at the Inception 10th anniversary. We couldn't look back at the film 10 years later on our own. So, of course, we are joined by a fantastic cast of special guests today. First up, we have, of course, the man, the writer-director of Freak AF and You People, Laron Chapman. Laron, welcome back.
Oh my gosh, it's good to hear your voice. It's been way too long.
Way too long. No, absolutely. It's pandemic has kept us apart, but through the beautiful magic of the internet, we are talking about Inception. And we're also going to be joined by another voice that are familiar to listeners. We're joined by the Cinematropolis' Alexandra Bohannon. Alex, welcome back.
Hi, this is Alexandra Bohannon reporting in live from my spare bedroom across the internet waves. Man, I have to say, I might be a little rusty at podcasting, but I'm really excited to talk to you today, Caleb, about Inception.
Lastly, I am so thrilled to be rejoined by No Film School in the Cinematropolis' Joe Light. Joe, welcome back.
Hi, thanks so much for having me again.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. And it's funny, Alex, you mentioned that. I was thinking, I can't remember when I was like putting together this episode, it was like someone put Inception on their top 10 of the 2010s list when we did that at the end of the last year. We were doing like a survey from people around the Oklahoma scene, a few people from friends around the internet saying, hey, like, what are your favorite films of the decade? And Inception made a couple of the lists, and I was like, okay, well, Inception's definitely, to be a little selfish here, definitely one of my favorite films of the last decade, even though I didn't put it on my list. This has been kind of a particular discussion I've been looking forward to having for a while. And then wouldn't you know it somehow, even though in pandemic 2020, it's the 10th anniversary still sneaks up on you. So here we are. And of course, listeners are going to be listening to this on the 10th anniversary of the film, July 16th. So we're really excited. Let's really just break the ice on Inception. I want to get some context for listeners. I want some context because I actually don't know your Inception journeys.
What's the most resilient parasite? An idea. A single idea from the human mind can build cities. An idea can transform the world and rewrite all the rules. Which is why I have to steal it.
This film, of course, was marketed under the tagline, "Your mind is the scene of the crime." And it was from the director of The Dark Knight, and then starred the well-known stars like Leonardo DiCaprio, Marion Cotillard, and Ken Watanabe. And then there was also Michael Caine, who is, I think this is the film where they're finally like, all right, this is Michael Caine is a staple of a Christopher Nolan movie. But also they had new hot and up-and-comers at the time, Ellen Page, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Tom Hardy. It was definitely a pretty all-star cast and a good mix of what people knew worked, but also a mix of people who I think most everyone knew who Ellen Page and Joseph Gordon-Levitt were. Maybe not Tom Hardy, but we're like, yeah, it's gonna be good to see these guys on a film again. But let's talk about the first teaser trailer. This teaser trailer doesn't really tell you anything. In classic Christopher Nolan form, it tells you absolutely nothing about the film. It is, I don't even think it's actually the Inception score. It's a song that definitely seems like they were consistent with the themes of the score, but it's just like a lot of the big bombastic bassy sound, and then hit Leonardo DiCaprio, I think, just like looking in various directions. And the thing that stuck out to me, though, is he's talking about breaking in and stealing an idea. Let's go around the table here, starting with Laron. Did you catch the teaser trailer for the movie before you saw the film? Or maybe you didn't see this teaser trailer, but you saw another trailer?
I feel like I saw anything that was put out about it at the time. In my impression with it, because I was a fan of his by that point, I felt like he kind of reinvigorated the comic book movie scene. And so to seeing him do another genre film was really exciting. But I felt like the trailer itself, Nolan is too clever for spoilers. Like anything he shows you, is gonna be enough to kind of intrigue you, but again, it's not going to you're not going to be able to conjure anything about the plot necessarily, because he won't reveal those things. He's better at just more evoking kind of like mood and tone, and so you have an idea of how the movie's going to make you feel,
Yeah, most definitely. And I think this is especially where, and again, we'll get probably more into this later, but this is where you really start to see Nolan's approach to marketing, because I think The Dark Knight, which was his previous film in 2008, right before this, that one I don't think they marketed a ton about like the plot, but they definitely marketed the heck out of Heath Ledger's Joker for that film. So it definitely was, you had a better idea stepping into that movie, or even Batman Begins. You kind of knew what you were going to get versus Inception and later Interstellar and Tenet. Even like when you see the trailer, you're like, I don't know. I mean, it looks awesome, but I don't know what it is. So yeah, I think that's a very notable. He's keeping it ambiguous, focusing on the tone, and like finding clever ways to communicate the kind of concept of the movie without being explicit of what the core concept is. It's really weird. But okay, yeah, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. Alexandra, how about you?
So I refreshed myself on this specific trailer in prep, and I realized that, well, for one, like you said, it kind of, it's not that it misrepresents what the movie is, because I think it's so much more than just necessarily Cobb's story at times, but it's not exactly, this nails exactly what I saw on screen. But I do remember, like, I actually do have an explicit memory after seeing this specific trailer of that title graphic at the very end, where Inception turns out the word Inception is made into a maze, which I always found it strange that was never kind of brought back for, like, I had to look at like, oh, what was the release, Blu-ray release? It was just Inception, like in red on like that kind of grayed out monochrome background. But I specifically remember the maze graphic when watching it. And of course that kind of thing just makes you heightened and makes you want to see more. But yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of hard to spoil something like this where it's so vague, which I appreciate. More trailers should take a page out of this book. But yeah, that's kind of where my experience with this particular piece of marketing. Yeah.
And I think that would probably be consistent for a lot. But I hadn't even noticed the maze thing, because it is something I recall when looking at the trailer, Alex. So I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, it wasn't consistent in future marketing materials, or at least like kind of the posters or anything like that. Joe, how about you? Did you catch this trailer? What was your kind of response?
Oh yeah, for sure. I can't remember when it was that I saw it, but I remember I, like Laron, was already a fan by this time, so I knew that it was something I was going to see. And I think what was most compelling, even though it is vague and it is mostly just Leonardo DiCaprio. Like the imagery is so strong in all of the across the marketing material for this movie. I think we're kind of living through it again almost with Tenet, because the marketing is based a lot on vague ideas and sort of hints and these strong images that you don't know where they're coming from or where they're placed, but they're so compelling on their own that you're thinking, I do want to see that movie. So that's kind of what I was like going into it. I know I didn't spoil myself going into this movie like I have with other Nolan films. So yeah, I was excited and I really enjoyed the marketing campaign for this.
This was probably the first film I think I decided, I saw the teaser and I was like, I am going to, as much as I can, avoid other trailers, because I wanted to be surprised, and especially having seen The Prestige, which was one of Nolan, his more recent original screenplay, I guess you would say. Like it wasn't based off of like a comic book like Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. And I was saying, wow, that movie blew me away. And when I saw that movie the first time, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't even know it was about magicians. So I wanted to kind of recreate that same experience. And I think the beautiful thing about this teaser is you can watch it. You say, I know it's dealing with dreams. I know it's going to be big. I know Leo's in it and the music's going to be really cool. So I'm there. Listeners, you know a little bit more about where we're coming from and our experience with the promotional materials and Christopher Nolan. When we see, you think about Christopher Nolan's journey, like as a director, he went from he made like his own little indie film, The Falling, which is kind of a calling card that got him the money and the backing he needed to do Memento, which led to Insomnia. And then he gets Batman Begins, which, by the way, Batman Begins made a lot of money, but it wasn't like a runaway box office hit. It was fine. But he then gets The Prestige, which does fine. And then The Dark Knight, which, of course, was a runaway success. I think, there's a lot of factors we could go into there. Might be another podcast. Heath Ledger's Joker was, especially, it was already a highly anticipated film just because the Joker looked so different from what had been done before. But also with Heath Ledger's passing, it only kind of added to the momentum and interest, I think, of the mainstream. And of course, that movie, The Dark Knight, 2008, was very, very well received. That leads to the question, like, what are we going to do next? When are we going to get our next Batman sequel, especially the way The Dark Knight ends? Chris Nolan, he's got to make another movie. I need to see where they're going to pick up. And he says, nope, I'm going to go do my own film, Inception. This is actually a script that he'd been working on for, according to him in an interview in 2010, he'd been kind of piecing it together for over 10 years. We were probably saying, all right, well, he's making an original film. It's not a Batman film. What is this going to be like? Because it also looked very big budget. So I'll start with you on this one first, Joe. When you saw Inception, what was your reaction? Was this something like, were you excited about it because it was original? Did you think it paid off, or were you out there thinking, man, I really wish I would have got my Dark Knight sequel sooner?
I mean, I was excited about the film being original. I think I'm just somebody who is always desperate for there to be original films out. So I mean, like, we had that amazing year with There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men. I know Country is based on a book, obviously, but I'm just always desperate still constantly for just something original, like something not based on IP. So for me, going into this, I was already kind of mostly buying into it. I think just the fact that it was something that was so ambitious and something that was so original. My reaction was very positive, I think, unlike my now husband is very negative about this film. So, and it's still pretty negative. I think we may have even saw it together. I can't remember.
You guys are still together. Yeah. Congratulations. You survived the Inception debate. It's a challenging one to have.
Yeah, we're still fighting about that. But I was very excited about the film going in and very pleased with it coming out.
Fantastic. Alexandra, how about you? What was your take when you saw Inception for the first time?
Sure. So at the end of when Batman Begins happened, I have never been not that I dislike that movie, I just have a lot of weird emotions about that movie. And so going into The Dark Knight, I had, again, it was something that's like, I wasn't really hankering for more. So I did like that film. So whenever I'm at the end of The Dark Knight, I wasn't like, man, Chris Nolan should just drop everything and make more Batman movies. I was not that was not my big ask, And so when we got Inception, I think my family had like a thing for Chris Nolan, because I remember they rented The Prestige like from our local movie gallery back in when we were in high school. Yeah, the deepest cuts movie gallery. Back in my day, you had to go somewhere else to rent movies instead of your house, your TV. Anyway, but we got the movie, and so I think it was a pretty natural evolution. I think I saw it maybe with my parents, Inception, and all that to say, I was blown away. I wasn't demanding another Batman, so I wasn't disappointed by this original feature. And I have to say, it was just, I didn't know that movies could be made that way. Movies that were as wholly original. I know Nolan has cribbed on other pieces that are intertwined within Inception, maybe, but I didn't know that was possible, to make something that felt totally different from everything else I had really seen at the time, that felt thoughtful, that felt like it was trying to get at maybe bigger questions, and it was standing on its own two legs, not supported by the machine of referencing like big IPs like Batman, or I guess we weren't really into superhero time. I think Iron Man was 2008 maybe. So we weren't really on that road yet, but yeah, I'm thankful for this film. I'm really glad it came out when it did. And yeah, that's kind of my take on that situation.
I like what you're saying there, and I won't get ahead of myself, but just it's not that original films can't be made, but seeing one of this scale, because blockbusters especially have, at least for the last, I'd say 20-ish years, leaned so heavily on trying to make surefire hits. So they base it off of properties they already know. There's a lot of blockbuster-esque formulas based off of what they know works, and not as much innovation. Christopher Nolan doing this film did not play into any of those formulas, at least as far as I can tell. And original cast, original script. Maybe the biggest, I would say, positive of The Dark Knight is that it gave Christopher Nolan the clout to make a case for his original films, because again, Batman Begins did all right, and I think it was critically well received. I liked it a lot, but I don't think it had the like love and dedication of a fan base in the same way that Dark Knight did, and it certainly didn't have the box office gross. Dark Knight, I think, I need to run the numbers, but I know that by the time it was all said and done, it did break $1 billion, which again, especially in the 2009 was not as common as it is today. So no, I think again, Alex, I'm glad that you kind of paint that picture there, because he really doesn't. He plays by his own book. He doesn't necessarily adhere to a lot of the more tropey or blockbustery type formulas that I think that we're used to seeing in the theater. But Laron Chapman, I want to get your take here. What was your initial reaction to Inception?
Throughout the process, I mean, it was mind-boggling, but I feel like when I left the theater, I felt like my head was spinning, and I immediately had to have a conversation about it. It's the kind of movie that I went to see in theaters multiple times with different audiences, because just to see their reactions to certain moments, because it was very much an event movie, after you've seen it. Like there's so many individual set pieces that are just so breathtaking. But I think my takeaway from it was, what I was most just so blown away by was just the construction of the story, just how intricate and involving it was, and how engrossing it was as it went along. So it's as much a masterful piece of storytelling as it is a visual spectacle. And so it really does kind of it's the perfect hybrid of having like an indie spirit with like commercial appeal, and I feel like that also characterizes most of Nolan's films.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great way to put it. Indie spirit, commercial appeal. It's crazy how he's able to find a way to work such big ideas, and some of them I would even say are challenging ideas, but into a blockbuster spectacle. And I do think The Dark Knight was that was, I mean, again, I think he'd done that in, Batman Begins to some degree, but the way he was able to work like a lot of those loftier, darker things into The Dark Knight in a way that mainstream audiences liked and connected with, really set him up to take it further with, ideas that were more personal to him. Just indulge me for 1 second. I'm going to gush on this movie, and I promise I'll get back to I'll
How dare you?
I just am going to, well, it's to lay my cards out there. So I started writing film criticism as a hobby, and I was not good at it at the time, in 2011. Inception, in everyone's film going life, they probably have films that impact them a certain way. This was the film where I actually thought I was losing touch with my own reality because of how much I couldn't stop thinking about it. I walked out of the movie, and I was with some friends. It was the last summer I was living I lived with my parents. I moved back in. It was after my freshman year of college. And small town Indiana, there's not a whole lot to do there, not going to lie, except for we did have a movie theater. So that was like the one outlet I had all summer. But Inception was the one, me and my buddies, we came out. I think we saw, I want to say it was like the 7 or 8 p.m. type showing. So we walk out of the parking lot around like 10 o'clock like probably like around 11 o'clock or something. We're sitting there out there in the parking lot talking till 3 a.m. in the morning. So, and then I went to sleep, just like laying in bed, still trying to like piece it all together in my brain, like just, digesting the movie in a way that I don't feel like I'd done as much in the past. I don't want to say there weren't movies that I had to think about like that, but I remember like talking about it for hours, going back home, thinking about it when I went to sleep, woke up the next morning and was still just like eating breakfast, trying to like chew on it. And of course, at the time I was living at home, so I had a ton of time on my hands. So, but to Laron's point, the other piece though was I was able to see this film with multiple audiences. So I think I saw this film 4 times in theaters, and I saw it with different groups each time, and I saw it in like 3 different theaters. So it was definitely a different experience every time I went, and the conversations that I would have with the people I was with afterwards were very different each time. And what was really great about it, and I think when we're going to get into this more in the discussion here, is that this movie really, he leaves it just ambiguous enough in so many different areas that everyone can kind of have their own take, but he's not definitive enough to where I'm like, well, you're just wrong. You know what I mean? Like, you could say it, and as long as you can make a case for it, I'd be like, that's an interesting theory, and we might talk about some of those later. But I found it to be like a good kind of gateway into film criticism, because it was more like I was obsessed with trying to figure this movie out, which led me personally to say, well, I want to do that with other movies too. And not every movie is going to have some big complex plot construction. So the things, that became more of a draw were themes. And so, this really was a formative film for me personally. And I know that Christopher Nolan obviously is a huge impact on a lot of people. So checking a box that I think is probably pretty common among a lot of white males out there. But this is a movie I fell in love with. But I will say I haven't actually watched it in several years. A couple things that we didn't note that I wanted to hit on that just stuck out to me is also out kind of breaking the mold a little bit. You mentioned, Alex, Marvel movies. Iron Man was 2008, like as you mentioned. And this is a couple years after that. But like already there was a big push in the industry to go towards the CGI VFX, like full blown. This isn't that far. This is only 5 years removed from Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, which was an almost entirely green screen movie. And there was definitely I know, right?
Sorry.
Well, I said that because that was how I at the time, that was James Cameron's Avatar was 2009. So there was definitely a push in the industry at the time to get everything CG. I do think we've swung back a little closer to the middle. I still think CG is overwhelmingly the way things are done, but Christopher Nolan has been that advocate who's saying, no, I am going to film as much within the lens. I'm going to capture as much within the lens as I can, and anything I can't do, I'm going to we'll work it into post-production somehow, which again just requires more meticulous planning and creativity on his end. And I think that's actually still true today when you rewatch the film. I mean, there's a couple of CGI sequences that I think are a little dated, not like
chunky, yeah.
But I mean, overall, like the big moments of the movie did not rely on CGI, and I think about like the scene with JGL or Joseph Gordon-Levitt running down the hallway. Twisting, that was all done practically. They like mounted a lens to one floor and they spun the room around. It was, it's crazy. And by the way, I believe Joseph Gordon-Levitt also did his own stunts on that. But I remember when I saw that the first time, I literally said, holy shit, like out loud in a theater full of people, like, cause it was just, it didn't feel like I'd seen it before. So, just want to give a shout out to the VFX. And, lastly, And I do think we are going to talk a lot more about this in a little bit when we talk about the influence of Inception on pop culture. The soundtrack also. Of course, we have Hans Zimmer had partnered with Christopher Nolan on Batman Begins and Dark Knight. And again, I think that what is interesting to me is that like this is still kind of the same recipe, kind of that same electronic style that Hans Zimmer was really, making the way to go at the time. I think he did it here, and this is the film I think even more so than the Dark Knight Batman movies is the one that's kind of stuck and influenced maybe the way that at least during the first half of the 2010s, we heard a lot of really bassy soundtracks and scores and films.
Yeah, the score, it still kills me. I wrote this in like that year in review, the movies of the decade thing for the Cinematropolis, and the 2011, the next year, whenever the Academy Awards was for it, this score did not win the Academy Award, but it's one of those, like, in hindsight, like in terms of the long-term impact on the industry, that should have been like obviously the standout for the contributions, the score, for better or worse, on the movie industry, definitely in action thrillers for basically the next foreseeable decade.
Don't worry, we're going to get to talking some trash on the Academy later, because just remember that the King's Speech is the one that won Best Picture that year. So just keep that in mind. That cultural impact. And I'm not saying no shade on that movie. I'm just saying when you look at cultural impact, I mean, yeah. People aren't thinking about the King's Speech in 2022 much. Okay. For this look back, of course, we all watched the film again, and I do want to spend probably the bulk of our time today discussing the themes and ideas that seem to stick out today before we really determine whether or not Inception still holds up 10 years later. I'm actually going to start with you on this one, Laron. What was your general reaction upon this rewatch?
I'd say about the same. I think, obviously, as you mentioned before, like some of the visual effects are a scotch dated, but the major set pieces, because a lot of it's been done practically, as you said, it really holds up well. I think, as you mentioned, the themes and the story still resonate. The performances are all, like, again, you have an A-list cast here. There's not really a wasted performance or, what have you. I think that upon rewatching it, what I loved most about it is that, the first time you watch it, or maybe even the first two times you watch it, it's very complex. So there's a lot to chew on. There's a lot to kind of dissect. But now, because I understand it and understand where it's going, I'm really able to just kind of sit back and bask in how well made it is. Again, just the construction of it in general, without being confused and trying to pick up little breadcrumbs of what it all means and what have you. So I was able really this time to really just kind of enjoy the mechanics of it, and if not just trying to piece together what's happening moment to moment.
Right. Having hindsight, knowing, okay, we know generally where this story is going, we know what it's about, so now you can kind of focus on that. Okay, how did he actually execute on these big ideas? Like what worked
right.
well about it? Yeah, absolutely. Joe, how about you? How did this rewatch treat you this time?
I think, like Laron, it was about at the same level. I think what is interesting, at least for me in this rewatch, is just kind of thinking about it in terms of where I am now also. So like watching it 10 years ago, I was pretty young and like didn't have any professional experience as like a writer or anything. So, and now I'm coming off of almost 5 years of like reading scripts professionally. So for me, it's watching it through the lens of the writing and like thinking about how it's structured and what a feat it is. I think Laron mentioned that earlier, just structurally. And I know that we will probably talk about the exposition, but like how exposition is handled in this film fairly well, I would say. So I think the rewatch for me was a little bit more engaged with the material and the level of storytelling. So for me, it was really interesting to watch again and think how a writer would plot it out and what a challenge it would be. So yeah, I think that was what was different for me, and I still enjoyed it. So yeah.
So it holds up. So good. It wasn't just a hand wavy magic. It actually was good quality writing, it sounds like, from your perspective.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I think so. I think there are always ways that things could be better. I think characters probably could use a little bit of work in this, but overall, I think I was kind of the same with Dunkirk as well. Just thinking like, how do you even plot this out? How do you make sure that you're balancing everything, all this? I think he's balancing like 5 concurrent storylines in this film.
Yep.
So It's a pretty crazy from a writing perspective, and the fact that he does it with such a delicate touch. I don't think anything is like too heavy or yeah, I think everything is just really balanced well in this film, considering how much there is and having to do it all in just a little over 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot crammed into 2 hours, and no, I mean just like one thing that I noticed this time around in particular was the way, and they even make a joke about it in the movie. So just the way they work so hard to set up all these rules in the first half of the movie. Well, it's twofold, but they like the basic fundamentals of like the rules they set up in the first half of the movie, just so they can basically break most of them in the second half. But like break it in a way that it doesn't like disregard what they've already told you, but they're saying, well, you learn the rules so you can know how you can break them. And I think that's really interesting. Of course, Joseph Gordon-Levitt at one point tells Owen Page in the movie, he's like, oh, so you notice that Cobb spends a lot of time doing the things he says not to do. Which I thought was kind of a little bit of self-referential sense of humor there. But no, I think the scripting in this and the exposition, the way that even though you're like, there's still some stuff they're rolling out 2/3 of the way through the movie that they're like either reminding you or reframing something they've already said in a way that you have a better understanding of what does this actually mean? What's the intent of the writers and the character? So yeah, it's. Normally, you would say this is super exposition heavy, but the way he's able to pace it all out and plot it out, it worked for me this time as well. Alex, how about you? What was your reaction on this rewatch?
So I think I liked it just maybe a skosh better, like just maybe a hair better than I did in theaters. I think you get so tied up, like you were saying, like you watched it 4 times in theaters because you were still trying to figure it out, puzzle it out, like untangle your thoughts about it. And like Laron was saying and what Joe was saying is like now you get to just enjoy and let it carry you through the film. So the fact that I'm like, okay, I'm not trying to like untangle what I think is going on and apply it to the screen and then be wrong, that actually kind of helped me as a viewer enjoy it more. What I also found interesting, we talked a second, someone mentioned stuff about character. Joe said that the characters did need some work. And that's kind of one thing that after I stepped back from the spectacle, which is used to great advantage in this film, and I stepped back from my, like how I perceive things to be going on and sitting with the characters, realizing that our protagonist is basically the only one that is fleshed out, and he is not a very good person.
He's awful.
He's kind of a terrible person. And in the midst of the plotting and how dream within a dream within a dream you get, I know at the very end, and I don't know if we're worrying about spoilers for a film that we're celebrating as its 10th anniversary release at this point.
Spoil it.
Okay.
Why are you listening to this episode if you haven't watched the movie?
Yeah. Basically, please, what are you doing here? So when we get to the end and we got Cillian Murphy's character in the vault in the ice palace that looked like a rip from like, I don't know, like a James Bond movie ice palace kind of fortress thing. And he pulls out the pinwheel. Like I cried, obviously, but then you remember, oh wait, this is all fabrications of Cillian Murphy's own mind because some competitor wanted to dissolve, for capitalist gain, wanted to dissolve, competitor's empire. And like, that was one thing I was like, damn, this movie has great feels, but at the same time, you feel bad for like rooting for these people, considering they happened to find the one son of a CEO that was the new CEO that had daddy issues that really wanted to like go out and set something out for his own. But what if they didn't? What if he wasn't the mark? What if they just destroyed this one guy's life because that was going to be the case? So happens he actually wanted to do something else with his life. So I've been kind of wrestling a lot more with kind of characters, the morality of the characters, and character motivations on this rewatch. It's nice to be able to like examine those instead of being like, oh my God, is the top gonna wobble or not? You know, and that's where the conversation ends, which is a lot of the discourse in the past 10 years has been, what reality are we now in? Which now feels almost irrelevant.
Right.
It's still relevant, but not as pressing for me to have an opinion on.
And this is one of the trappings of a heist movie, right? You got to think that Ocean's 11, those guys are all, I mean, sure, they're stealing from a bad guy, but they're also stealing from a bad guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like you kind of and again, I think part of like the heist trope is you write a protagonist that you can relate to, and in this case, they utilize the kind of the guilt of the wife to kind of be like the dead wife to be a way for the audience to connect with him. But yeah, I mean, when you actually, let's not forget, you meet Cobb when he's actually trying to steal information from Saito's mind. You know, like it's not like he's not a great guy, and neither are any of these people for that matter. And I also think, too, mentioning, you know, Fisher or Cillian Murphy, his character, that's I think you hit the nail on the head there, Alex, because it kind of really plays into what Laron and Joe mentioned that I also noticed this time, just about the execution. That particular subplot which is, I don't know, the heist, the Fisher's journey I found to be particularly interesting because really, like, the photo that he placed with the little pinwheel he put there, and then they use that like that. It's I think that might be like the one happy memory he had with his dad, maybe, that he put there. And you never know if his dad actually valued that or not. So it's all just like them trying to help, like feeding this guy his own narrative that he wants to hear, you know. And it's
right.
but they're the ones controlling the lens in which he views that moment, you know. I hear what you guys are saying about the character, and we're going to talk about that more in the kind of when we're looking at the themes. But I do want to just go ahead and plant the seed now and throw out there, like, maybe it's very intentional that all the characters outside of Cobb are written to be pretty ambiguous or without clear motive, especially if you're viewing the lens through, oh, this all is a dream. So they're all just projections of Cobb's anyway. But that's one of those things, though. You have to ask yourself the question: was this intentional? Was it an accident? Did no one intentionally leave it that way? And if he did, then that's really great form. If you're trying to make that kind of have that question on the audience when they leave the theater, or maybe he just didn't write the characters very well. You know, so it's kind of again. That's the thing that's interesting about this movie is there's so many things that are left ambiguous that you can't tell if it's intentional or not. So it's kind of like it's left up to your audience response to the movie to decide whether or not you thought it was a flaw or a bug or a feature, you know?
Bug or feature. Exactly. Absolutely.
We've already talked about like the nature of Christopher Nolan's scripts. Let's jump into what I would consider like the really first big element here that I want to break down, which is the non-linear, non-traditional plot structures. So Christopher Nolan, even by the time of Inception, was already known for these. He did, most famously, he did Memento, which is a movie that has two storylines that are converging, one at the end, like chronologically at the end of the story, and one at the beginning, and they're working towards the middle of the film. So that's pretty cool. And then you have Batman Begins, which is honestly pretty straightforward, but it's got flashbacks as a pretty notable piece of that story. And then you also have The Prestige, which is like, there's like, I think I have to go back and rewatch the film, but there's a point where you're like two narrators deep into a story. Again, he has always been fascinated with the nonlinear plot structures. And of course, Dunkirk, a film that would come out, 7 years later, also utilized a very, very experimental plot structure that I think is up to debate how much any of these plot structures work, but I do think it's especially notable when you're looking back at the Christopher Nolan's body of work. So we'll start with you on this one, Joe. Like, what do you make of Christopher Nolan's sort of obsession or interest in non-linear editing, and how do you think that plays a role in the story of Inception?
Well, I think it kind of just plays into what you already mentioned, is his intentionality with making the audience feel as if they're experiencing the dreams that the characters are experiencing. I think it's incredibly intentional here, especially with the very beginning and the very end. So at the very beginning starts in the middle of Cobb already being in limbo, trying to get Saito out after who knows how much time has passed. And in the very end, you have him kind of coming out of that moment in the middle of their plane ride. So that kind of contributes to the theory that this is all a dream and like we don't know what's happening and we don't know how we even got here. So yeah, I mean, I don't know why I can't speak to why he's so obsessed with playing with these things, but I think that for the most part he does it really well and in really interesting ways and manages to, I don't know, it just engages the audience on a different level and makes you be more present, I think, in what the stories that he's trying to tell, which is always, I appreciate a film that either makes you question what's going on or, I mean, like I was a big Lost fan. So like I love, I love when a project is like, is this happening? Is it really happening? What's going on? Like I love audience engagement and just feeling challenged by something. So I definitely appreciate what he does in a lot of his movies.
Lost fans unite. Also, that show ended. That show ended like 2 months before Inception came out. So, fun fact, 2010.
Yeah.
Also, just celebrated a 10-year anniversary of sorts. Laron, tell me, give me your perspective here. And I know you've done your share of screenwriting as well. I think everyone on the podcast today has done some form of screenwriting. But what do you make of what sticks out to you about his use of plot structure and nonlinear plot structures?
I'm really in awe of the way he constructs his stories. I wish, and maybe one day I will, I won't say never, but I'm so pragmatic and so like structured that I have to like, I can only see things in linear form when I'm writing. I can appreciate them, other people's, interpretations of storytelling. I myself have just never delved into it that way. But what I think here with Nolan, it is very deliberate. And he creates disorientation, and that it seems really kind of, integral to the storytelling itself, because you're in this dream landscape, everything shouldn't be so clean cut, clear and dry, like you should be disoriented, because it kind of plays into, just thematically how things are working. But I think what comes out of it though here is that he's forcing the audience to pay attention, because when you're disoriented, you're immediately, provoked in a way where you now have to pay attention to try and make sense of what isn't making sense for you, so it kind of, it's a cool, like deliberate tool to make people tune in, because you can't sit and casually watch a Christopher Nolan film and be like, oh, okay, I'll just pick up where I left off, like you're going to be lost, you're required to watch, it's active viewership. So.
And Alex, what do you think?
I think the nonlinear storytelling here, I mean, it's one of those things where if I support it whenever it feels like it's supporting the text of the film. Whenever it's just added in because someone wanted to be like, yeah, let's try it out, but it doesn't actually like aid in like the kind of tone and themes of the film. That's whenever I start questioning, okay, why is this kind of included this way? But it's very clear from the get-go that this supports Nolan's vision for most of the films, especially the original kind of concept films that he's made. Non-linear storytelling supports the tones and themes of those films. I think if you're comparing like two of his oeuvre, like Inception with Interstellar, I think Inception kind of pulls it off a little bit better. I don't know I don't know why. That might just be a personal opinion of mine, but I think it kind of supports what he's doing just a little bit better. But yeah, I think it just it supports the text, and it does challenge the viewer, like everyone has kind of noted, and it makes you not be able to watch in a kind of casual fashion, and then it allows you as a viewer to kind of be like, okay, you cut your teeth on Nolan, now I can go after some more some harder and more engaging text that really demands something of me as the audience, because this is just kind of the best way to kind of tiptoe into kind of more challenging texts from film and from just traditional literature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that comparison to maybe more traditional literature, because I don't think he's the first person to construct a highly complex plot structure like this. I always think of like Slaughterhouse-Five as being like one that does a really good job with not I wouldn't say as complex as Inception, but thinking about like stories that utilize time. And because I actually do think the one thing I just want to point out too is that I think the editing and the plot structure is designed in a way to either mask or have something to say about the passage of time in a way that is done, when done linearly, it doesn't quite have the same impact. So I think about like The Dark Knight or even The Dark Knight Rises, so his two other Batman films, they really don't utilize flashbacks. There are some in Dark Knight Rises, I should say, but generally those are both very straightforward stories. Same with Insomnia. So like in that, those movies feel a lot more present, like they're happening in a very condensed amount of time. And I think with Inception, the use of the nonlinear storytelling is a way to kind of disorient the audience, but also force them to pay attention, like you guys have already said. But I think it's also there to kind of create that dream vibe. Like you don't know how long when I was rewatching this, I was watching with my girlfriend, and she was like, "Wait, how long did this whole thing happen? Like we see Michael Caine over in Europe, and then we see him in America at the end of the film. Like how much time passed? How long were they planning this heist? We don't really know. It's nebulous. And the way they edit it, it could be a week, or it could be a month, or it could be a year. And I think much like dreams and the experience we have in dreams, where time is kind of disorienting and you kind of hop around a lot. I think we see that here in Inception as well. So I think you look at how he utilizes it. The time factor is the one that always sticks out, especially if you're looking at Dunkirk. And Interstellar to a certain extent. I would say Inception, the only movie I think that structurally might work better than Inception maybe is Memento, but I don't think Interstellar or Dunkirk are quite as clean as we get with Inception, but still done overall pretty well. Now we've already mentioned the exposition piece here, but Alex, I wanted to get your take on this. Like, did you feel like the exposition, the way they delivered the exposition, worked well for you?
For Inception, look, he's building a mostly like a highly original world. There's gonna be some fucking sitting down at a cafe and spoon feeding you what the fuck is going on. Sorry, I realize but it's just like that's the real thing. And so it's like one of those things for a film with the runtime it has and like the complexity that it has. I'm more willing to be like, okay, everyone needs to be like on the same page at what potentially is going on here. So I don't really mind having kind of spoon feeding exposition at times, but there is plenty of moments where of really pure like audience disorientation that it kind of does balance out that approach for me. So I think it does as best it can with that, but.
All right. Yeah. Good points. Laron, what do you think? Exposition, highly effective, too much, not enough? What do you think?
I appreciated it. I'm generally opposed to exposition in films if what you're getting ready to say is getting ready to be shown, like that. But I feel like the setup initially here, there's so many intricate layers to it. You really need something to grasp on. Otherwise, it's just going to be frustrating and not enjoyable, So I feel like even though there's a lot of exposition, there's still a lot that contradicts what happens and what, So it's just kind of, it's balanced as Alex said, there's a balance of explanation and then, deception, so it goes back and forth with it. I wasn't bothered by it. I appreciated it when I was watching it because by the time we finally get that cafe conversation, I was like, okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like maybe in another film I'd be less forgiving of it, but I think with this particular genre and particularly a story this intricate with this many layers, it works. It's almost necessary, So
Well, and I think one thing you guys mentioning the cafe, it really makes me think about how he tells you and then immediately shows you. And I know that, like, obviously show don't tell, but like it's like he just explained this really complex thing and you're not really sure what he means totally. Oh wait, here's what he means. Like, here's what he's talking about right after he just told you. He's showing you exactly what he means. So it kind of removes enough of the ambiguity that you can kind of generally follow along with the concepts that they're rolling with. Joe, exposition, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with everybody else. For me, the exposition at the very first was more of a bump because they're in the middle of this big action sequence, kind of calling each other, you're the designer, you're the architect, you should have done this or that. Like, that is a little bit more natural to me. I think for me, the cafe sequence and the whole thing with Ariadne was a little bit less of, it was not as on the nose to me because she's a fish out of water. She's coming out from the outside. She's coming into this team. So it makes sense narratively for him to be explaining. She's acting as an audience stand-in. So they're not explaining everything to her. They're explaining everything to us. And that's just a technique that you can like sneak into stories to make that kind of thing work. And also, this is just a heist film. So heist films are always going to have them, walking the audience through every step of what they're going to be doing. And then those twists and turns that follow and the contradictions. So yeah, I mean, and the idea feels fully fleshed out to me, and I would rather have more than less in this situation with how complex the world is and how much is going on. So I don't really mind the exposition as much, and I think, like Laron, I might not give other movies as much of a pass if everything else weren't working so well.
The next big theme I really want to hit on is what is reality? So let's all step back into a time machine and go back to the late 90s. It was a simpler time. In the late 90s, I actually find the late 90s to be an especially interesting time in pop culture, because we hadn't hit 9/11 yet. So the things we were thinking about were a lot different than the things we were thinking about after 9/11. A couple of movies that Christopher Nolan said inspired him for Inception include Dark City and The Matrix, and even said like he wanted to do more with kind of some of the ideas he experimented with in Memento, which I think you can. If you've seen Memento, you can definitely see a lot of those ideas at work in Inception as well.
Awake. Where am I? Some anonymous motel room.
I guess I've already told you about my condition.
Oh, well, only every time I see you.
It's my memory.
Amnesia.
No. It's different from that. I have no short-term memory. I know who I am. I know all about myself. Since my injury, I can't make new memories. Everything fades. I've told you this before, haven't I?
What's the last thing that you do remember?
My wife. Dying.
Do you think that Inception adds a really original spin on the recurring sci-fi theme of what is reality? Almost it's a classic theme. Almost goes back to the whole Plato's allegory of the cave sort of thing. So what is reality? Do you think when thinking about The Matrix and thinking about Dark City, is this a film that you think is up there with that level of impact, influence, and just overall quality? Joe, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think culturally, I mean, I haven't unfortunately seen Dark City, but I loved The Matrix when it came out. So I'm predisposed to like these kinds of stories, I think. I think it's definitely a unique take on the question of what's reality. I think, again, from a writing standpoint, it's really interesting to kind of to peel back everything they had to do here, thinking about, well, your characters are experiencing dreams. Well, how does that have any stakes? What's the balance you have to strike between what is the real world and what's dreams? There's the tension, of are you just trapped in your mind this whole time? So I think he did a lot of really smart things to make sure that, like the bad dreams are still scary. The pain that you experience there is real. You run the risk in this film of falling so deep into yourself that you can't get out and your mind turns to mush. So I think that he did a lot of really interesting things, even like the subconscious being like an enemy within the dreams. He just did a lot of things that were really smart in the writing to make this feel interesting, scary, tense, and like it has any stakes. Because I think in a clumsier film, you could start with the idea of, oh, you're able to go into other people's dreams, but then it would kind of stop there, if that makes sense. Nobody would, like a less experienced writer would just, and somebody who hadn't spent as long as he did on this film, I think he spent like almost a decade working on the idea. Like you wouldn't have a story if you didn't have all these other kind of tense elements that he added into the idea. So yeah, I think it's definitely a unique and interesting take.
Yeah, very cool. Alex, what do you think? What do you make? Is this in the echelon of Dark City or The Matrix, or maybe even any of those other, like, what is reality movies?
Yeah, I also second Joe. I haven't seen Dark City, so I can't speak to that. Obviously, The Matrix is as important as it is for a reason. And I think this does kind of round out a different perspective of how one can question reality through the medium of film. Because definitely, like, The Matrix has its own themes and tone and commentary upon who's really in charge, all this kind of stuff. Inception kind of dodges all of those, like, bigger questions of, like, societal structures and things like that, and we're focusing in on this core concept of the malleability of people's consciousness, and then our central kind of hub character of Cobb. I mean, obviously, you can't talk about a film questioning with reality without mentioning Paprika, which is Satoshi Kon's 2006 animated feature, which I know there are calls to that film with in the visual language of Inception at times. But even though, like, I think I've seen Paprika like a couple years ago, and then Inception obviously like 3 days ago, and it's like, so it's hard to even say, well, and Paprika does it better, Inception does it better, because they feel still different enough that they kind of round out the concept of using film in this way to get at this core concept of talking about how people perceive different things and experience their various realities. So I think Nolan just he's really good at what he does, guys. Like, that's just gonna be real.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Laron, I need you to help me out here. I need you to help me out and tell me that you've seen Dark City. Have you seen Dark City, Laron? Did I indulge myself too much by throwing this in here?
I've seen Dark City, but it has been it's been probably more than 10 years ago. So I don't have a clear concept of it enough to dissect it deeply. But I mean, but just on the concept of again, reality and this dream state, like, I feel like it is a great example, like, of all of those. And in its own way, it's very modernistic, in that sense, instead of having this kind of gothic nostalgic appeal. Because those films are considerably darker, both, I mean, aesthetically and thematically. I think there's something a little bit more clean and slick about Inception by comparison. But what I find very interesting about it is that it's, and oddly, the film that kind of came to mind, and maybe because I watched it recently, whenever I was watching it, was the animated film Inside Out. Because thinking of how we process trauma or our different emotions and how those things affect us, like, and using that same kind of landscape here, that's dealing more with reality and lived experiences. But in many ways, that's kind of what Dom's character was doing. There were projections of those things in a dream state, so, but all happening simultaneously. But I found it to be a great example of the kind of themes that The Matrix and The Dark City kind of brought about.
Lauren, I hadn't even thought about Inside Out. That is a great pull, because I honestly, in a lot of ways, feel like this has more in common, and Inception has more in common with Inside Out than it does Dark City, The Matrix. And the thing that sticks out to me about those two movies is those movies are tackling very big themes, the themes of, like, liberation, of seeing through the lie, of finding out this horrible truth that everything you've known is not real, and trying to kind of become woke to the lie, or to liberate yourself from the world that you've been living in, so that you can really kind of address the real injustices that are happening in the larger scale. Versus Inception, like Inside Out, is much, much more personal. This is again, we've already talked about Cobb as the central figure. He's really the only one that's fleshed out, and the story, pretty much we only get information we need to know that's relevant to his story. I mean, yes, there is some kind of world building, just given the huge big premise and big scope of the story that Nolan's working with, but they really don't go out of their way to explain like all the ins and outs of the dream science at all. They just give you just enough information to know exactly what you need to know to understand the story and Cobb's journey through the story, in a similar way that I think Inside Out is also a highly personalized story to that particular character. I would say, there's a lot more of the pink elephant sort of thing. And then Inside Out, of course, rest in peace, Bing Bong. But, there's a lot more of that kind of like fun, goofy, dreamy stuff in that film, which actually really takes me to our next question here. And then we'll move on to the next theme I want to discuss, but Christopher Nolan's vision for dream reality. So both Inside Out that Laron mentioned, and I think Alexandra, you said it first, Paprika, films that I think are both really interested in delving into the projections of the subconscious, and both of them are significantly more colorful. Where this feels a lot more, again, slick is a really good way to put it. I don't want to say calculated, but the architecture is a big thing in this movie, and I can tell that the person who designed dream reality in this world, this is again not a criticism, but just an observation about how Nolan visualizes dreams and what a dream reality would look like. It's all clean. There's still like these very clear rules. And yeah, the most outrageous thing we see happen is the train driving through, the middle of downtown LA. Versus, in Paprika, we see giant parades of colorful creatures we don't recognize for no reason. Things happen for no reason. Same with Inside Out. There are like these inexplicable moments that I think are common in drunk. So I wanted to, I'm kind of showing my hand a little bit here. I don't necessarily know if I have a preference over one version of dream reality or another, but I do think that the cool thing about dreams is that you can do all sorts of crazy, insane stuff. And not have to explain it. It's just right away as it's just a dream that Christopher Nolan does not indulge in at all. So Laron, what did you make of the dream reality? Were you a fan? Yay, nay, or indifferent? Like, what did you think?
I mean, given the way that the story is told, I think his vision of it makes sense. It might have been interesting to see maybe some darker, more or slightly surrealistic imagery in it, because everything here again is very slick, but what I think he gets incredibly right about the dream landscape is really just kind of the again, the mood and the tone and the dread, and again, it is even with the main character being not a particularly great person, the things that have happened to him we can identify with or have empathy for. So it's a mixed emotions of things, things that are both personal again and also again disorienting. So I liked his vision of it. It was Christopher Nolan's dream, So and I think that was valid.
All right, very cool. Alex, what do you think?
So I have I like it, but I have this I just have this really interesting idea, and I just want to explore it for like a second. If I find that there is a very clear visual text difference between the kind of dream realities, obviously, that we see Paprika, Inside Out, and what we see in Inception. What is a reason? Why would those languages be different besides just the directors having different visual appeals and blah, blah, blah? Well, I do think that there's something to be said about the reason why we are in these dreams. Why are we in these dreams? The reason is motivated by capital. It's motivated by money. I know Cobb wants to get home, but the rest of the crew, whether they're figments of his imagination or subconsciousness or not, they're aiding him. One would assume they're getting paid too. So all these people are on this kind of ride to help implant these images, visions, dreams in this one man's mind. So there isn't as much room to include like the more fantastical elements of dreaming because it is just irrelevant to their mission. It's mission centric. There's no room to explore and play. It's all about we have a driving goal and vision and we have to get in and get it out and do it. So there's not a lot of room to build and explore. Now we do see Cobb go into his own subconscious with Mal and build these fantastical cities and which we see them crumbling. And I think that's where we actually get as close as Nolan gets to the fantastical reality is in that subconscious because they're there for joy, for exploration, for living together, for dreaming together. That's why they're there. But I do think the core motivations of these characters, why they have engaged in these fantastical realities, are kind of different. And I think that also translates to the visual language used to convey these varying dream realities. I have no preference. I think they work for each of their own, but I do think that the motivation behind their presence is maybe a difference visually.
Yeah, that's a great note. Joe, any do you have any thoughts on dream reality in particular and how Christopher Nolan visualizes them in the film?
Yeah. First, Alex, those were awesome points. I loved those ideas.
Thanks.
I'm gonna just be writing focused on my end today. But what I'll say is that I've read a lot of bad scripts. You'll have like a lot of scripts that start with a really good idea and there's like lots of room, like they build a toy box but then they like don't put any toys in there. So like you might have like a really fun world, like we're gonna set this underwater, but then everything happening in that world is like the most everyday that could be happening there. So I think that what I appreciate about Inception is that Nolan is so smart about playing in that world. So for me, like things that stuck out were like at the first dream, it's raining because somebody needed to go to the bathroom. That to me just like felt really smart and like echoing what's happening in the real world within the dream. So like the weightlessness as they're falling in another dream. I guess I just appreciated that more than anything, like that he was so smart about doing something in the story, but then making sure it's reflected in a unique way within that dream.
Yeah, and I think my favorite kind of fun thing he does is when of course you've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt shooting the he's going around shooting all the projections, and then Tom Hardy and there's a couple of them he can't get it, and Tom Hardy's like, well, you got to dream a little bigger, darling, and then he pulls up the grenade launcher. Yeah, that's a really good example. Those are both really good examples. I didn't even think about that. The rain because the guy had to go to the bathroom. That's a good pull. I overall I think it's a really strong dream reality. So I don't want to be critical, but it is one of those things where dreams are weird, and you kind of wonder like, what else? If Christopher Nolan was to make not an Inception 2, but another movie with dreams, would he do it differently, or would he make a similar type of reality? But I think you guys all raised great points, and Alex, I think. Especially noting that like this is really about what sort of dream reality did the story and the characters demand, I think is really an important factor there. And I think it works pretty well overall. And I'm just gonna make one more note. We've got to keep moving. We're going long already, but I just want to note that I think, mentioning earlier, there is this inherent question: is Mal right? Is Cobb dreaming the whole time? Because if she's correct, that means everything that happens in this movie is a dream. And I do think that there is. I maybe this is a little too generous to Christopher Nolan, but I do think the lack of character work outside of anyone other than Cobb. I think a lot of the editing decisions that really make the like when things happen, like how long did it take them to put together this heist? Well, you've got like Tom Hardy's flying from Mumbai, they're flying to Europe where they're convening, and then he's gonna go work under Browning for long enough to know like what his like mannerisms are and their history. Like how long was he working that job? You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that feel like they are very intentional, and not just for like runtime, but just because you are also trying to keep the audience not at ease, like not sure about exactly what's going on. Because if it is all a dream, all the hopping around feels like a video game, and in a good way, like you're just hitting the plot beats exactly where the next kind of checkpoint is. And I don't think time is super relevant when you're in a dream reality, and that's part of what makes the dream reality so enticing. But I also think that, again, editing wise and all that, it was meant to throw us off. And so again, that's a generous, maybe giving Christopher Nolan a little bit of credit there. Because if we did have fleshed out characters, if we did have more kind of connect the dots, how did this person get from A to B to C? Like how did Saito get to Mumbai conveniently show up right when Leo was running away from those guys? You know, lots of things like that just really make you feel like I don't know exactly what I'm watching. And I choose to believe that it was somewhat intentional. So anyway, kudos to that, sort of like constructing that dream reality. So another thing, let's move on to our next topic. So Christopher Nolan, though, I would say he's proven himself as a visionary in terms of filmmaking style and execution. There has been some criticism over the years that he has a quote unquote woman problem. And I've read this, and I only bring this up because I've never heard, there's not been like a moment in the last 10 years where all the feminist writers, feminist critics come out there at one time and say Christopher Nolan's the worst. Especially in 2020, this is a thing that I feel like, could happen at a moment's notice, especially if you guys heard about the chair incident from like 2 weeks ago or whatever. But I do think that it is something every time one of his movies comes out, people write about it a little bit. No, and I think generally most of the criticisms I've read have been pretty generous towards Christopher Nolan. But I mean, his movies are generally very, very, very male-centric, white male-centric. He has a lot of dead wives in his movies. If you go look at his oeuvre, he's got a lot of dead wives, guys. So I want to get your take, and I'll start with you, Alex, Joe, and then Laron. Do you agree? Would you consider Christopher Nolan's maybe lack of a female perspective a weakness of the director, or you think it's just circumstantial based on the stories he's telling?
Yep. This is one that I've been chewing about a lot since watching Inception. Not necessarily, I hadn't really considered it within looking at the length of his work, but yeah, it would be undeniable to notice and observe all the dead wives along the way. And I don't necessarily have a problem with exploring the same theme over and over and over again. I would hate to call it like sexist, but there's something that he's trying to work out, and this is his way of working it out. I honestly, I have less of a problem with, maybe this is me having a very limited view of it, but I have less of a problem with Mal and the littered dead wives, and more of a problem with the only other female character in Inception being just a vehicle to dump exposition. Like that was more my of course the only other female character is the person that like doesn't know anything and has to and is the person that is the emotional foil for Cobb. It's the woman that's unlocking his deep-seated emotions, because I guess all the guys are too busy shooting guns or doing what other Chris Nolan thinks guys do in this movie. So I guess that if Inception has a feminist ding from me, it's more for that, not necessarily you gotta kill all the women and blah blah blah. But I'd be happy to hear other people's perspective on the subject matter as well. So
Joe, what do you like? What's your take? And maybe I start with Inception, and we can lead into maybe his larger career as well.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, it's a big question. I think for me, I don't really have an issue with the female characters in this movie. More, what I have an issue with is that there are other characters that could have been not men. Like the chemist character could have easily been, a woman or a non-binary character. I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Tom Hardy, because I know that they were kind of playing things up as like a semi-lover spat the whole time. So for me, I really like that energy. But I think other characters in the film, like Saito, even though I love Ken Watanabe, could have been a woman. Like, I think that he just doesn't, it's not always in his mind to think well, that could be a woman. I think he just kind of falls back on, well, I like this actor, or I want to work with this actor again. So, and that's going to be probably in a lot of cases a dude. So that's more the issue for me. I think, like, I understand that everybody in this film is kind of serving a stereotypical or a one-dimensional purpose almost. Within his like larger body of work, yeah, I think again it's just like he falls back on the male perspective. I would love to see a movie with a female lead from him. I know that he changed I don't know, would you count Interstellar as like a female lead? Because I feel like it wasn't really her movie.
Yeah.
I know that they changed that character from a boy to a girl, but it's been a long time since I've seen that, so I can't really speak to how much weight she carries, that Murphy character carries.
Oh, to me, I've seen it literally this year, and it definitely feels like Matthew McConaughey is the driving force. I mean, his daughter and Anna Hathaway's character are very central to the plot, but it definitely feels like Matthew McConaughey's movie to me as a viewer.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm remembering too. So again, like there's not a bad thing about telling movies about guys. I just feel like, can we get some ladies in there maybe occasionally? Is more my thing. Like just even like think about having more women maybe. Don't fall back on being like, oh, well, here's a doctor or an astronaut or a police officer and we're going to make them a man just because that's where your mind goes. So that's what I would like to see more, probably. I really don't have like a problem with him as a filmmaker. I don't think. I could probably think of some issues I have with him, but it's just a big question and a problem within the industry overall. So if we want to talk about that, we can. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, no, I think that's all good perspective. And Alex, I appreciate you weighing in on Interstellar because I'm pretty sure you're the person who's seen it on this most recently. So definitely seemed like a McConaughey gig as I recalled it. So Laron, what do you have anything you'd want to add to like that? Just like looking at this through like a feminist lens and like anything you'd like to add to what Joe and Alex have already talked about?
So more to Joe's final point is kind of where my mind was going with it. Until this question was presented to me, I hadn't really considered that, and that could be a product of male privilege, but in hearing it, and then going back and kind of looking at his body of work and reading some kind of think pieces about his issues with women, I do kind of think of it as a bigger industry problem, and he's a byproduct of it. Like this is just in general, this is a problem with film, like mainstream movies in general. I think as it pertains to him, I think it's probably more circumstantial. But what I think about that doesn't mean that it isn't a weakness. So it might be circumstantial, but if these points have been brought to, his attention in some capacity, I do think they're absolutely valid and worth, considering moving forward with his projects. And that could be retweeted to every filmmaker. I don't think as it pertains to him, he would be like the first person I would single out as having a women's issue. Like I would look more closely at someone like Lars von Trier or some, like people like that who just seem to just hate women. Like I don't.
Michael Bay.
It's just hard to watch those movies because I have a lot of respect for women. And so when I see them seen in such degrading kind of ways, like it just feels gross and unnerving. Here, I think with him, it's more of a blind spot than something he's doing, again, very egregiously. Like I don't think he hates women. I think he's probably just a super macho male with all these big ideas and hadn't considered that maybe, diversifying the genders in his films might actually be an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He has a mostly white, mostly male stable of actors, and it honestly wouldn't be that hard especially these days where everyone is trying to uplift actors that don't fit that mold, for him to like diversify and broaden his scope of who gets cast in his movies.
Right.
Yeah, and I think to that point, the only thing I would add, and I guess the question you have to ask, just as we close out this piece here, is just do we think he's getting better? I can't say with any confidence that he's getting better with women, especially when you think. Again, I think I think the consensus of the group is that it's a blind spot that hasn't been addressed because of a larger industry problem. And I think that's a really fair way to put it, because I don't ever feel like women are treated disrespectfully in his movies, truthfully. Yeah, sure, I guess JGL sneaks a kiss with Ellen Page, but that's kind of meant to be a joke. So, I am interested to see what he does in the future. I know, making Murph, played by Jessica Chastain was a big move, and but I think in terms of diversifying, we are seeing, he's got a person of color in one of the lead roles of Tenet. Now, like, you can't put one person of color in the lead role and say we're good, but I do, wonder or hope that might be him trying to maybe address some of his weaknesses in the past, because people of color and all, really not a good strength of his in any of his films. I hope to see him progress, and I hope to see him grow and maybe try some new things, especially again, I am over the moon excited about seeing Tenet, but at a certain point, we're going to have such a strong sense of what Christopher Nolan's sensibilities are that we're going to get tired of them. And not necessarily in a bad way. I'm just, you're going to see enough of them. You're like, all right, well, kind of like Tarantino. Like, there are certain things I love about Quentin Tarantino. I'll be there day one for every single one of his movies. But there's certain things that I'm kind of tired of dealing with in all of his movies too. So, I think it's up to the filmmakers and those auteurs to push themselves to kind of find new ways to realize those visions or whatnot. So, good conversation to be had. I do want to briefly hit on a subtopic here, the overall impact of Inception. So the impact on blockbusters. So Inception was an instant box office and critical success. It brought in $62.7 million on its opening weekend in the U.S., and then worldwide $829 million by the time it concluded its theatrical run. And as of July of 2020, the film holds an 87% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So in many ways, I think too, this film, and we've already talked about this, the indie spirit with kind of the makings of a large studio blockbuster, they kind of work together. It flies in the face of what blockbusters, and I would say most of the post-2000s have done. You can see, especially today, with superhero movies everywhere. Everything's based off of a superhero comic book character, or it's rebooting a franchise we already know. And Christopher Nolan really was going against the grain with Inception, and continues to go against the grain. But I do want to see, Laron, I'll throw this question to you first. What lessons do you think studios actually took from the success of this film?
Well, I don't know what they actually took from it, but what I would hope they took from it is that you can take risks, and to not be so beholden to age-old formulas that are cash grabs, but essentially don't influence anything cinematically, so I think moving the needle, because what he did was he proved that you could make a mainstream blockbuster movie and have it actually be about something, besides just explosions and things, things happening in that sense. But I think what Joe kind of said at the top of the show here, that she's really drawn to original storytelling, and I think that we'd be surprised how many audiences feel the same way. I think good storytelling appeals to everyone, and I think taking on those kinds of risks and taking on original storytelling is very important. And you can package it a different way. You can put $100 million behind a really good idea. Not necessarily every movie needs that, but we prove that it can be done here, and that audiences will turn out for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, what do you think? Just looking at how big blockbusters have been made, marketed, since 2010. From what you can tell, what sorts of takeaways do you think studios took from Christopher Nolan's the success of Inception?
To me, it feels like they didn't really take the primary hopeful lesson from Inception, which is that, like Laron was saying, a unique, interesting, thoughtful story paired with great performances, great visuals, all the whole 9 yards are what people are kind of craving. Instead, I think they took away, let's make big spectacles with scores that sound like Brahm and have like that are kind of like, I don't know, cash grabby, not necessarily based on original, unique concepts, but hey, you know, we can follow. It's hard to say that Inception made a formula, but I think a lot of studios with poor intentions took the kind of, I hate like a snapshot of what they thought Inception was and why they thought it worked, which wasn't for like the reasons where I think we think it actually worked, and just like make it all about the special effects and how cool it looks and yeah, I wish I'm hoping that we're gonna get more thoughtful storytelling paired with, you know, lots of dynamic action and everything. And not every film needs to be Inception. I mean, we need our Fast 9, you know, we need like films like that, but
Justice for Han.
It would be nice to see more films like Inception.
Justice for Han. That's all I got to say to that. Yeah. No, I think those are, I think I certainly tend to lean more. I like that, Laron, you gave us like the best case. Like, here's what we wanted them to learn. Alex, like, you're rolling out saying, here's what they probably learned. Joe, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the middle of that. I think that I just am like desperate constantly for studios to take risks. I mean, I get frustrated with Disney because they have more money than anybody needs in the world, and they just keep churning out all these superhero films, and there's nothing really inherently wrong with those. I'm just like, you could be financing all these little indies and take a loss, and like it wouldn't even register. So I mean, I think I have been surprised by Warner Brothers, at least occasionally, since Inception came out. Like, I took a look at their releases, and they had a few that ended up becoming bigger, kind of a surprise. Like, I know they did Conjuring came out of that after period. Contagion came out of that period. So I think that they like try at least a little. I mean, they still have Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter and all those, but occasionally they will like release something. Gravity.
Yeah.
So they maybe are doing a little bit better as a major studio in terms of taking a few risks. I don't know. It's another big question that frustrates me pretty easily. So I want more original content. I want more original stories. I want people to give money to people who have big ideas.
Absolutely. So I think here's kind of my take, and I hope it brings it all home. Because I think we're all kind of on the same page, coming from different angles. Here's my perception when you really take a look at, you know, the success of Inception, especially if you look at how Christopher Nolan's feature films have all been marketed since. I think we've seen the rise of this in the 2010s. I mean, not saying that direct auteur-driven cinema hasn't been a thing since the beginning of, you know, movie making, but I think that studios have worked very, very hard to build these big mega franchises. I mean, we're seeing with all the superhero films. We've seen Warner Brothers try it with DC. Fast and Furious is one from Universal. Event films, blockbusters, right? Big tent poles, and they're saying we want to make the tent poles bigger. There are gonna be fewer of them. Just collectively fewer movies. We're going to pour more money into the tentpole films, and then, you know, that means fewer, you know, risks on the indie side. but the risks we're taking are actually huge. And at one point, I remember it was 5 or so years ago, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg called it an unsustainable business model. Because there's like at some point there's going to be too many consecutive failures, and if you lose like one tentpole movie, that could set you out for an entire quarter. At least from a business perspective. So why am I talking about tentpole models and that? Because I think that what we've seen in the rise of in 2010s is the brand, the MCU. We see the DCU, but I think a big part of that has actually been marketing the director as their own brand. So what we see with Christopher Nolan, one of the lessons I see them taking, and we see this if you look at the marketing campaign for Interstellar and even Dunkirk, like they're marketing as, look at this indie, we're supporting our visionary filmmakers by giving them tons of money to make these huge tentpole models. And they do it. So, but there are fewer of these people they're doing it with. So Christopher Nolan being like the poster child, but you're also seeing, you have to think about Quentin Tarantino's movies, the way they market his movies. The way you market, Joe, I really like how you mentioned The Conjuring. I think that especially once we get past like the 2012, 2013 part of that decade, you start to see James Wan get pushed up on that pedestal where if it's not based on a pre-existing property, what they're banking on is marketing the director as the brand. That's the thing people are buying into. Okay, it's not a superhero pre-existing property. Well, we know Christopher Nolan can open seats, so let's market the heck out of Christopher Nolan in the cast. So, and I don't think that's not the worst lesson you could take away from it, but I do feel like we've seen a lot more of that. Less attention, like with the risk, quote unquote, riskier studio tentpole films. There's been a lot more emphasis on the director and the cast than there has been on the actual idea, the story. And again, not the worst thing, but I will say the problem I see with that though is, again, you're still playing into the big tentpole model. Throw bigger and bigger budgets behind fewer films, which again leaves less room for indies and like a lot of the other voices that are trying to make a break in the film scene. So at least that's kind of my perspective, and that's not like I wouldn't say with confidence that's exactly the conversation that happens in these executive marketing meetings. But I do think that's a trend I see. If you go look at the follow-up campaigns of his other original non-IP movies, and like the campaign is almost exactly the same. And you see the same tactics rolled out for Django Unchained. You see the same tactics rolled out for The Hateful Eight, and then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood most recently. Again, those are not bad things to market, though. I think my bigger concern is that they're marketing fewer films like that. They're basically putting fewer directors up on these huge pedestals, and there's a lot of people who aren't getting that sort of credit or attention, and then everyone else who's trying to like just carve a name out for themselves or making superhero movies until they can kind of get that same level of clout. So anyway, that's just kind of my take there. I hope we get away from tentpole blockbuster model filmmaking, because I think all of us kind of resonate with what Joe said about, hey, what if instead of making one $250 million movie, you made 10 $25 million movies, and that's 10 other movies you could be making with and $25 million for a lot of like up and coming filmmakers would be like a dream come true. So
please.
So there's a lot of room there. And it would seem to me, again, I'm not one of these executives, but it would seem to me that the risk is actually lower, because if you have 2 of those fail, well, that's still a lot smaller of a failure that you can and you make like 5 of those that actually make a lot of money. Well, yeah, you lost money on 2 of them, but there's 5 others that made a lot of money. So really you're looking at a net positive versus you make one movie, The Lone Ranger. Here's a good example of Gore Verbinski, who at one point was like one of these hot auteurs until he made enough flops. But yeah, like he makes The Lone Ranger and it flops tremendously. Well, all of a sudden Gore Verbinski is not really making movies anymore, at least not on that scale. And also like the movie lost the studio hundreds of millions of dollars. So it just seems like a very high risk, and yes, the rewards are greater, and I'm sure it looks great on those quarterly earnings calls, which I'm sure is a lot of what's driving the decision making there. So, well, yeah, we were running way long. So let's just get to the big question, then we'll close out. Big question, and we'll keep the section short. You have to ask the question. You can't talk about Inception if you don't discuss, does the top spin, or does it fall, or does it matter? Let's discuss, and we'll start with Joe on this one.
It falls. I'm an optimist. It falls. However, I do appreciate the question, because again, I like it not only as a shock moment, but I also like it as a question that's posed to the audience. And I think it is something that helps make the film more memorable. everybody, or a lot of people at least, still talk about the ending of Sopranos just because it's this huge question mark. I think it's sort of similar here because you can really get into, well, he saw their faces this time, or they cut the scene this way. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. I think it falls.
You think it falls? Okay. Good deal. All right. So we got one optimist for the group. So one in 2020, I'll take it. We'll see how much optimism we have left at the table. Laron, does it spin? Does it fall? Does it matter?
Man, so you see, I'm going to take the political approach here. I'm going to be the politician. It's obviously, I think how you perceive the ending says a lot about yourself, honestly. Like she said, it's a glass half full, half empty perspective. Do you have a need for this to have closure in that way? Or are you a cynic that says like, no, it's all whatever? I think the ambiguity is more interesting. I think not having an answer creates a more ripe, thoughtful discourse following the feature. And I think that's intentional. I think it's intentional for us to keep having a conversation post credits. Did it? And there's enough evidence either way to support your cause, however you want to see it, however you want to interpret it. And I think that, again, is all very intentional, so that everyone can go satisfied, because you can believe what you want to, and you're not wrong. There's not really a wrong answer here. I'd like to think that it falls. I mean, I'd like to believe that it does. But I respect him for not giving me a definitive answer.
It honestly really gave the movie a big, if you want to talk about big impacts, it gave the movie the legs are so much longer. If it's much more, just the whole film is more interesting if you don't answer that question, right? And I'm thinking about, like, recently the Watchmen, HBO's Watchmen wrapped up at the end of last year, and the showrunner David Lindelof was talking about, and I will not spoil that show, but the ending is kind of similar. They leave it on a question where they set it up where it could go either way, and they just leave it there. And David Lindelof is like, no, it's not a cliffhanger. He's just like, but I would rather audiences just make up their own mind, and whatever they decide, whatever they land on is kind of up to them, and it's going to tell them more about their perspective than it does the show. And I just think it creates a healthier, more interesting, more nuanced discourse around the thing you're watching. And I think Inception absolutely did that. And I think that's part of what's given it that huge impact we've had over the years. Alex, does it fall? Does it spin? Does it matter?
Okay. I am so on the one hand, I think it falls. On the other hand, I don't think it matters, because the concept of the totem, which I know Cobb breaks all the rules, right? The concept of the totem is that it's your totem. No one else touches it. It was Mal's first. So it basically already defeats the purpose, because it was never fully his to begin with. So, like, the fact that it does or doesn't spin whenever it gets touched by him, people know how it works. I think it then it doesn't really end up signifying anything by the end of the film. That's more my like, oh, I gotta be, looking at the plot, exposition, blah, blah, blah. Thematically, I think I love the ambiguous ending. I love that I had like a 2-hour conversation about a 10-second piece of film, like a 10-second little clip at the end of that film, that I wouldn't have had otherwise if the top had toppled, if it had a clearer indication that it wobbled, if there had been more like signs throughout that this was going one way or another. Is it a dream? Isn't it a dream? I love the ambiguity of it. I think that's one of the most special parts of this film. I think my heart is set on that. It falls, and that Cobb is objectively in the reality in which he needs to be. But I do there is a heavy, heavy case for him being so deep down that he's not in reality anymore. So, but that's where I'm at on it.
Right. Like, why do his children look the same? They still, even in
they look the same in the same outfits. Yeah, I know. Sorry, I was shouting a lot yesterday.
Yeah. No. And that was one of those things I didn't really ever think about before. But when I was watching it this time, I was like, listen, they're wearing, it's not that like they're the same age. Cause again, going back to the ambiguous nature of the way they edit the film, we don't know how long he's been gone. We don't know how long he's been away from his kids. So if it's been like a year, sure, they can look about the same age, but it's the fact they're in the same outfits and the same pose that he sees them every time. And again, that's also a little bit of that's the beauty of like how he stages things. So I'm glad we have a table full of optimists. I think it falls. Now I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole of internet theories because we could have a whole nother podcast about the crazy theories around Inception, and guys, there's so many of them.
But a taste, please. Yeah. I would like one.
Well, Alex, you really got ahead of me because I was going to bring up the fact that the premise is inherently flawed on the totem because Cobb is already breaking the rule when he introduces it. So that is not his totem. That is his dead wife's totem. The dead wife who said that they're still in a dream when she killed herself. So I don't think that's a trustworthy source. The other
Absolutely.
thing, so I think you have to question the entire premise. And when you start playing that game, when you're deconstructing some of the premise, then you're like, wow, I really don't know what's real and what's not anymore. And then it seems more logical that it's a dream. Now, that said, I will bring up the one other theory that I find compelling enough to convince me that he is not in a dream. Have any of you guys heard or read about the wedding ring theory?
Oh, no.
Mm-mm.
You have to pay stupid close attention. So this is people who at some point in the last 10 years like would go through and freeze frame and probably shot by shot the movie.
Oh my God.
He, based on this theory, and I kind of read about it before I rewatched. I watched this film twice for this podcast, and I read about it between for viewing number 1 and viewing number 2, is that when he is in the dream sequences in this movie, he is wearing a wedding ring. When he is in the quote unquote reality, he is not wearing the wedding ring. And he is not wearing the wedding ring in the last scene of the movie. So but that's the thing. You would like, they don't point that out in the text of the movie at all. It's purely visual, and it's like, and you have to really be watching for it. But it's one of those things I kind of wonder, like, Christopher Nolan, did he like say, I'm going to sneak this in and see how many people notice? Are people just reading into it too much? I don't know. And that's what's, like, again, speaks to just the power of that, leaving that question open-ended. People can kind of draw their own conclusions or look for their own theories. And I did find the wedding ring as Cobb's totem to be compelling, more interesting even than like the whole premise is a lie because the totem's not his. So I think that he's probably in reality at the end, though the case could be made otherwise. I also think it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, I do think part of what this movie is trying to get at is your reality is what you make it. And whether or not he's actually in the quote unquote real world at the end of the movie, that is what he has chosen to be his reality. He has decided that whether he's in reality or he's 2 levels deep, this is where he's settling. And that is a reality without his wife, unfortunately, but it is one that he believes to be true. So I think there's like a hint of that kind of deconstruction, postmodern touch of that postmodern idea there. Like reality is what you make it. You can choose your own reality sort of thing. And so at the end of the day, I think when you're looking at it from that character perspective, no, I don't think it really matters at all. But well, guys, we have talked about so many things, and we are running very long. So I really appreciate you all taking the extra time out of your day to join us and talk about Inception. So we're going to wind down by asking 2 questions. We're going to first start by asking the question, do we think this is one of the definitive blockbusters of the 2010s? And do you think it's going to hold up in 10 years? Do you think that this is going to be one kind of like Star Wars or The Terminator or, any number, count the classics? Do you think it'll be one of those movies? And Alex, I'll actually start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's so influential. It's like it's like always hard to explain how influential it is. And especially influential on like young hearts and minds, the next generation of creators who are looking to see out in the world that their unique concepts for a story actually can be a feature film led by very prominent actors with like really big budgets. Like it's saying that there is still room in the world for unique and beautiful ideas. So yeah, I'm gonna hold it up. I'm gonna say it holds up 10 years later. And I was honestly, I hate saying surprised because everyone in like internet culture tends to dunk on things after they get really, really big and blown up. I don't feel like Inception had that quite a big a backlash besides, some casual satire from like South Park or Family Guy or The Simpsons or something. But I think that it's absolutely held up. And the fact that I was surprised with how much I still liked it in the year 2020. yeah, I think it speaks for itself.
That's always a good sign because as a adulthood has at least shown me, there's a lot of movies I loved 10 years ago that I watched today. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I can still like this movie.
Painful. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Laron Chapman, does this film hold up today, 10 years later, and will it hold up in 10 more years?
Yes, I think it absolutely does. I think it is what you would have the Matrix of our time, you know what I mean? The Matrix of a new generation or what have you. But I think in a different way, though, not in the way that will spawn sequels necessarily, but will spawn similar approaches to filmmaking, if you will. So, as you mentioned, like it being this big major blockbuster, it kind of redefined what that could be. It doesn't just have to be a Transformer movie or like the 17th iteration of Jason, like it can be this think piece film with great ideas, original storytelling, and have all the same spectacle that we would get in a Star Wars film or a Marvel film or what have you. And basically you can have your cake and eat it too. And I think that's what I think Nolan's impact is on mainstream cinema.
Have your cake and eat it too. Make a smart movie that you can also eat some cake-flavored popcorn with. I like it. Joe, what do you think? Does it hold up today, and will it hold up in 10 more years?
I think it does hold up, and I honestly was a little surprised at how well it did. As far as 10 years from now, yeah, I think it will be one that we kind of look back on, especially as his career continues. I'm just really interested to see what movies look like in 10 years. And like somebody mentioned, I think in our initial conversation, how movies are going to change considering, global pandemic, global civil rights movement. I'm just really interested to see like how that's reflected in movies over the next 10 years. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, none of us have a crystal ball, and I actually really do like that you mentioned that. 2020. I mean, I think the last couple of years in particular, like the culture is moving in a lot of different directions in a lot of different areas. So it is, you can't ever have a crystal ball. I mean, I don't know if we could have anticipated, sort of the types of conversations we'd be having in our larger culture and by extension our pop culture in 2010, saying, hey, we're going to be living through 1968 all over again in 2020, except for this time there's a pandemic involved. None of us could have called that. And I think that's really insightful, an insightful thought, something to keep in mind that, if things stay on track as they are, if 2010 and the way the movies were made stayed the same for 10 years, then yeah, Inception obviously 20, 30 years from now still, is going to be impactful. But with the way that things are shaping up now, and I even think about, the way the theatrical experience was already being changed dramatically before the pandemic, which seems to be accelerating kind of how people watch movies. And Christopher Nolan being so closely tied to the traditional theater going experience, I think it's a good question, Joe, and a good thing to keep in mind. Like, don't get too arrogant and trying to predict the future. But at the same time, I think this is one of those movies that, more to Alexandra's point, this is this is a movie that, if nothing else, it impacted a generation of up and coming millennial filmmakers who said, "Whoa, I can pull a Christopher Nolan, or even looking at other directors who've done similarly. Rian Johnson's another one, like make a couple of small indie films, and then through sheer luck, plus a lot of hard work, you inherit a blockbuster, and that blockbuster sets you up to have a successful career. I think that's exciting, and I think we are seeing some of that. I mean, I'm thinking about like Taika Waititi and how he's on the rise right now, and Thor Ragnarok giving him that extra boost to get to get kind of the buy-in to make like Jojo Rabbit or whatever his other films are. And so I think that, talking about the impact again, just I think Nolan has carved out a path that, while I think few will follow, there will be people who follow. And I think I really like that Alex talked about, it's the film, it's the impact it's having on the individuals that I think might might really be the legacy, 20, 30 years from now, seeing like, hey, this filmmaker, their Star Wars was Inception when they said, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to go figure out how to make movies, and I do believe that there are enough people out there who receive that sort of impact. So, all right, guys. Well, hey, great thoughts. Last thing, before we close out the show today, I always love to do the alternate media recommendations. So what should you be watching, playing, if you're playing video games, or reading, if you want to really continue down that Inception hype train? You like the story, you like the themes, you like the world. What's the next thing you do? So Laron Chapman, I'll actually start with you on this one. What is another thing you would recommend for viewers out there who liked Inception?
I'm going to briefly give you two. One of them is the Old Guard, which just came out this past Friday on Netflix with Charlize Theron. Really big, high concept action film. Female-driven storytelling. Also has that kind of heist crime aspect to it, but with a interesting supernatural element to it that I won't spoil. But definitely worth a visit. Also, there was a film I caught. I think it might actually have been out longer than in maybe a couple of years, but it's called The Perfection. And it's another one, as far as storytelling devices goes, just very intricate in the way that it kind of keeps pulling the rug from underneath you. Kind of just dealing with two prodigy musical women who might inadvertently be in a very bad, seedy sex trafficking situation. And they might be able to vanquish the patriarchal system, and I'm here for it. So.
Vanquish that patriarchal system. That's a segue there. On that note, Alexandra Bohannon, what do you recommend people watch, read, or play after finishing Inception?
Sure. Yes, I mentioned before. I'll say it again. Paprika. It is a film that I know Nolan had to have watched in watching to see the film, the final product visual language on the screen for Inception. And then I'm going to recommend a video game because I'm that person. And I'm going to recommend the Persona series. I'm playing through Persona 5 Royals right now. And it's kind of remarkable, the similarities in the conceptual formulation of a ragtag group of protagonists start breaking into people's minds to change their thoughts in order to get results in the world that they want. I mean, there's a lot of thematic similarities there. I mean, there are some differences. I think the bad guys are badder, and it's more clear that you're, quote unquote, the good guys, which makes me actually appreciate Inception's a bit muddy morality a bit more, honestly, because you're watching Cobb, who has not necessarily the purest of motives for what he's doing. So, but yeah, I would totally recommend the Persona series. It's so much fun. It's so wacky, and it's just really, really. There's an anime of it too. So if you're not the sort to play a video game, well, you can watch all the beautifully animated cutscenes done together as an anime. I think it's only like 25 episodes. So, and
it's certainly shorter than the 100-hour playtime of
Persona,
which again is great if you're into 100-hour playtime games. But they are very, very large games. Great recommendations. Yes. I love it. I love any time we can get some video game recommendations in there. Joe.
I'm going to recommend an oldie but a goodie. One of my favorite movies of all time, The Truman Show.
Yeah.
It is so good. As a younger person watching it, it was just like blew my mind in terms of the visuals, the comedy. I just think it's so great. Everybody should watch The Truman Show if you haven't already. And then if you just want like another take on what is life or what's reality, Jacob's Ladder is always a good one too.
Oh, yeah. Jacob's Ladder is fantastic. Great recommends. Yeah, The Truman Show. I guess I didn't even think about that. That was still, It was mid-ish. No, it was towards the end of the 90s. So it would have fallen in that same window, a couple of years.
98.
98, yeah. So that's the same year as Dark City, I think. Yeah, so you're looking at, I would put that right in line with The Matrix. And what is, everyone in the late 90s, we were trying to figure out, what are we even doing here? Does it even matter? And then 9/11 happened and that changed everything. But it was an really interesting time in cinema, and The Truman Show is one of the more uplifting, lovely, beautiful, sweet movies from that time. I love that movie. I am gonna put a couple out there. I am gonna echo Paprika, and again, I don't want to say to Alexander's point, there's not a chance. There's no way. I just can't fathom. He's never mentioned it as an influence, but if you go watch Paprika, some of the visual language in a couple of the scenes, inspired feels like a very nice way to say he really stole. And I'm not against people stealing stuff from movies, but there's certain sequences where you watch and you're like, wow, he ripped it straight out of this movie. Anyway, Paprika. It's a great film from the legendary anime director Satoshi Kon. All of his films are great, but Paprika I think plays with the dream reality quite a bit. I also want to give a shout out to Richard Linklater's Waking Life. That's definitely the movie that if you've seen any of Richard Linklater's movies, is all about waxing on about talking through all the philosophical implications of something. And it's literally just a bunch of, it's done rotoscope animation, which is another reason I really like it. So it allows them to kind of have a lot more fun with the kind of weird dreamy elements, the weird dreamy elements. So check that out, Waking Life. I don't know if it's streaming anywhere. It's kind of hard to find, and it's a movie most people haven't heard of. And lastly, I'm just going to make a pitch to studios out there, because I know studio executives listen to the Cinematic Schematic every episode. Listen, guys.
You never know.
You never know. So I'm going to make the pitch right here. You guys want to figure out how to make another Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Just literally put Freddy in it's not going to be Inception, but a very Inception-esque type story, but where Freddy Krueger's there trying to stop them every step of the way. You have a group of protagonists who are in the dream world trying to accomplish something very specific, and Freddy is the projections, just trying to stop them. I don't know. Make it a heist movie, though. It's got to be a heist movie with Freddy Krueger there, though, because I want more Freddy Krueger, but I also don't just want more recycled Freddy Krueger.
Inception of a Nightmare.
Ooh. Oh, man. That's a great title.
Oh, goodness. All right.
Throw it out there to the ether.
Throw it out to the ether. And executives, Laron is a filmmaker. He's on call. We have scriptwriters all on this podcast. We're all available. I mean, we're all in a pandemic right now, so give us a call. We can make it happen. All right. So
I would not be able to.
All right, well, everyone, I think that, we went on for 2 full hours about Inception, something that was originally supposed to be 90 minutes. So again, Laron, Alexandra, Joe, thank you all so much for your time. We're going to close up by letting listeners know where they can keep up with you and any of the things you're working on online if they want to see all the cool things you're working on. So Laron Chapman, we'll start with you. Where can people keep up with you? And I hear that you have a movie coming out on Blu-ray soon.
Oh, yeah, very exciting. 3 years ago, I shot this little tiny movie here in Oklahoma City called You People, and it's finally the little engine that could journey all the way to distribution. It comes out August 18th on DVD, Blu-ray, Vudu, and then various Walmart departments, as they're telling me, hopefully in my state, because it'd be really awkward if it's in Indiana, and I'm like, great, well, I'm not driving to Indiana to get a DVD. I'll just order it online. But so you can look forward to having your own copy of that. But you can follow me on Freaky AF Film on Instagram for regular updates on all of my crazy production endeavors, or follow me on Facebook at Laron Chapman.
Fantastic, thanks, Laron. Joe Light, where can people keep up with you online?
I'm writing a lot still for No Film School, and you can follow me on Twitter at Joe_Lightly.
Joe Lightly. I love that, by the way, the Lightly.
Thank you.
Nice touch. Alexandra Bohannon, where can people keep up with you on the interwebs?
You can you can keep up with me right now. I have a website. It's alexanderbohannon.com. I'm going to be real. It just has a link to my LinkedIn. So, hey, if you ever want to chit chat there, I'm fine with it. And definitely go and follow everyone mentioned on the show today.
Awesome. And of course, you can keep up with all of our work here at the Cinematropolis over at the Cinematropolis website, thecinematropolis.com, or, over on our social media channels on Twitter at the Cinematrop, or on Facebook at facebook.com/the Cinematropolis. If you're listening to this podcast, if you've stuck through the 2-hour conversation of Inception and you have enjoyed it, please go give us a rating or a review, whether it be on Apple Podcasts. You could also subscribe for future episodes, or if you're doing it on Spotify, give us a rating and follow us there. We would love to be a part of your normal podcast rotation in the year 2020. You can find me personally tweeting about lots of films and video games and sometimes TV shows over on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That's letter C, Masters Talk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for the special 10th anniversary episode of Inception. We'll catch you all again next time in